The Biohazard Wars. The first outbreak. The Deep Space Research Station Argus 9 floated in the darkness of space, silent and lifeless. It was supposed to be a classified military lab, hidden from the rest of the universe. But now, something had gone terribly wrong. Commander Elias Carter and his retrieval team had been sent to investigate. The last transmission from Argus 9 had been disturbing. A scientist's voice, filled with fear, had whispered, "It's evolving. It's thinking." Then, silence. The team's shuttle docked with the station. The airlock hissed as it opened, revealing a dark corridor. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows. The place smelled rotten, like something was decaying inside. "Weapons ready. Stay close," Carter ordered. His team, 6 highly trained soldiers, moved forward cautiously. Their rifles were raised, their breathing slow and controlled. The walls were covered in a strange black, pulsing substance. It looked like veins, twisting and spreading across the metal surface. Sergeant Mason reached out to touch it, but Carter stopped him. "Don't touch anything." They moved deeper into the station. The silence was unnatural. No signs of life. No bodies. Only flickering screens and abandoned workstations. Then they reached the control room. Lieutenant Vega activated a console. A log file appeared on the screen. "Let's see what happened here," she muttered. The team gathered around as security footage played. The first video showed scientists working. They wore biohazard suits, studying the dark red liquid inside a containment chamber. "The after strain," Vega whispered. "The classified bioweapon they had been developing." The next video showed panic. Scientists screaming. The liquid had escaped. It moved like a living creature, seeping into their suits, melting into their skin. Their bodies twisted, mutated. Within seconds, they turned into horrific creatures. Limbs stretching, bones snapping, skin turning into black, writhing masses. The final video was the worst. The monsters were not just attacking. They were changing. Their forms kept shifting, adapting. They were learning. The last scientist, his face pale with terror, looked into the camera and whispered, "It's evolving. It's thinking." Then, static. "We need to leave." "Now," Carter said, but it was already too late. A low, gurgling sound came from the corridor. The team spun around. Something was there, hidden in the shadows. Then it moved. A twisted creature lunged from the darkness. It had once been human, but now it was something else. Its skin was stretched and pulsing, its arms elongated into sharp, bony blades. Its eyes were hollow, empty pits. "Fire!" Carter shouted. The corridor erupted with gunfire. The creature shrieked as bullets tore through it, but it didn't stop. It moved faster, regenerating as it charged. It slashed at Mason, cutting through his armor. He screamed and fell, his body already changing. "Fall back," Carter yelled. They ran, dragging Mason with them. But more sounds echoed through the station. They were not alone. From every hallway, from every vent, the creatures came, dozens of them, crawling, running, shifting. They moved in unnatural ways, their bodies constantly mutating. "They're blocking the way," Vega shouted. Carter scanned the area. There was one option left, the emergency shuttle bay. "This way. Move." They sprinted through the corridors. The creatures closed behind. The black substance on the walls pulsed, almost as if it were alive, reacting to their movement. The station itself was becoming part of the infection. Mason was barely conscious. His veins turned black, his skin bubbling as the aether strain consumed him. "Kill me," he groaned. Vega raised her gun, but Carter stopped her. "No time. Keep moving." They reached the shuttle bay. A single escape shuttle remained. Carter slammed the controls, opening the hatch. "Go. Get in." The creatures burst into the room, screeching. Vega and 2 others managed to jump inside. Carter turned to grab Mason, but it was too late. His body had already changed. He lunged at Carter with clawed hands, his face twisted in a grotesque smile. Carter shot him in the head. The shuttle doors slammed shut. Vega hit the launch sequence. The engines roared to life, lifting them away from Argus 9. Through the window, they saw the station. The black infection spread across the entire structure, pulsing like a living heart. It was no longer just a lab. It was something else now. Something alive. Carter collapsed into a seat, breathing heavily. Vega wiped blood from her face. What the hell just happened? No one had an answer. Then, the ship's warning system beeped. Infication. DTTTTED. Carter looked down. His arm had a small black vein crawling up his skin. His eyes widened. The Athra strain was already inside him. The plague unleashed. The shuttle touched down on Europa Prime, one of humanity's most advanced colonies. A sprawling metropolis of gleaming towers and sky bridges, it was home to over 15 million people. The survivors who had fled from Athra Station stumbled out of the ship, gasping for fresh air. They had barely escaped the nightmare in space, but they had unknowingly brought it with them. The first infection. Inside the colony's main spaceport, Officer Daniel Grayson was the first to notice something was wrong. The survivors were weak, their skin pale, and some had strange, dark veins spreading across their arms. A woman collapsed near the immigration terminal, convulsing violently. Grayson rushed forward, but before he could help her, the woman's body twisted unnaturally. Her skin ripped apart, revealing writhing, black tendrils beneath. She screamed, but it was no longer human. It was a sound of pure horror, a monstrous alien wail. In the next moment, she lunged at the nearest person, sinking her elongated, bone-like fingers into his chest. The infection had begun. Panic in the city. Within 2 hours, the pathogen had spread across the city. People turned into grotesque, shape-shifting biohorrors, their bodies mutating at terrifying speed. Their screams echoed through the streets as flesh melted and reformed into clawed limbs, extra eyes, and mouths filled with jagged teeth. The hospitals were overwhelmed. Doctors tried every known antiviral treatment, but the pathogen adapted instantly, making all medicine useless. Even fire and energy weapons only slowed the creatures down. They never truly died. Governor Elena Vasquez ordered the city to be locked down. Bridges were destroyed, spaceports were sealed, and military forces moved in. Quarantine alarms rang through the colony. All citizens must remain indoors. Any attempt to leave will be met with lethal force. But it was already too late. The escape ships. Fear drove people mad. Thousands of civilians ignored the quarantine and rushed to the docks, desperate to escape. The military opened fire on some, but dozens of ships still managed to take off. What they didn't realize was that many of those ships carried infected passengers. The Athra strain was now loose in space. From Europa Prime, infected vessels jumped to other human colonies. The United Earth Defense Council, UEDC, intercepted distress signals from Mars, Titan, and even Earth itself. The nightmare had begun to consume humanity's greatest worlds. The war against the undying. In an emergency broadcast, Admiral Cave Soren of the UEDC stood before a grim-faced council. His voice was calm, but there was no hope in his eyes. "We are at war," he declared. "A war against an enemy that does not die. The Athra strain is no disease. It is an extinction event. We must prepare for the worst." As his words spread across human space, a terrifying truth became clear. This was not just a plague. This was an invasion, and humanity might not survive it. The enemy evolves. The battlefield had changed. What was once a war against mindless infected creatures had turned into a nightmare beyond imagination. The Athra strain was no longer a simple bioweapon. It was adapting. A new horror. On the outer colony of Vexus 4, soldiers of the 82nd Planetary Defense Force held their ground behind reinforced barricades. Sergeant Cole watched in horror as the infected charged. These were not the same sluggish, grotesque monsters from before. These creatures were faster, stronger, and more coordinated. One of them, a massive flesh beast, slammed into the barricade, its body rippling with unnatural muscle. It had no eyes, no nose, just a gaping mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. Bullets ripped through its flesh, but it kept coming. Behind it, another horror appeared, an infected super soldier. Unlike the others, this one wore battle armor, moving with terrifying precision. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, intelligence flickering within. It raised its rifle and fired. The barricade exploded in a shower of debris, sending Cole flying backward. "Fall back," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. His men followed, but the infected were faster. The battle turned into a massacre. The spread of death. Across different worlds, the reports were the same. The Athra strain was evolving into 3 deadly forms. 1. Flesh beasts, mindless monstrosities, unstoppable in their hunger. 2. Infected super soldiers, retaining their combat skills, but bound to the hive. 3. Airborne spores, a silent death spreading through the air, making entire planets uninhabitable. General Vasquez of the Unified Defense Council stood in the war room, watching live footage from multiple battlefronts. Entire cities were falling. Planets were being abandoned. The enemy was learning. Every time the military devised a new strategy, the Athra strain countered it. "We need to wipe out these planets before the infection spreads further," Admiral Kane suggested. "Firebomb them from orbit." "We've tried," Vasquez replied grimly. "The spores survive extreme heat. Some of them are even adapting to vacuum. If we keep burning planets, we'll have nothing left to save." A long silence filled the room. Then, Dr. Ilara Monroe, one of the leading bioweapon specialists, spoke. "We need to capture a live specimen," she said. "We need to study the infection's core intelligence." A desperate gamble. The mission was insane. No soldier wanted to go near the infected, let alone capture one alive. But there was no other option. A team was assembled. Elite operatives trained for high-risk missions. Captain Darius Voss led the squad. Their target, an infected super soldier. The dropship landed in the ruins of Outpost Theta, a once thriving colony now reduced to rubble. The air was thick with spores, but their sealed armor provided protection. Moving cautiously, the team navigated through the ruins. Then, the sound of movement. Through the scope of his rifle, Voss spotted one. A super soldier standing in the shadows of a collapsed building. Its body twitched unnaturally, head tilting as if sensing them. "Now or never," Voss muttered. A flash grenade exploded, blinding the creature for a moment. The team rushed in, deploying electrified nets. The super soldier roared, thrashing violently. Its strength was beyond human. But after a brutal struggle, they'd managed to subdue it. "We got it," one of the soldiers shouted. But then, the air filled with a deep guttural growl. Dozens of infected emerged from the ruins, eyes glowing with hive-driven fury. "Evac now," Voss ordered. The team sprinted back to the dropship, dragging their captive behind them. The engines roared to life as the infected swarmed the landing zone. Bullets tore through their ranks, but there were too many. As the ship took off, Voss looked down at the horde below. The enemy was watching, learning, and the war was far from over. "The hive mind awakens." Dr. Elias Carter stared at the glowing screen in disbelief. The data scrolling across his monitor made no sense. The Athra strain, the deadly alien virus infecting human colonies, was no longer just spreading, it was learning. His assistant, Dr. Reena Patel, leaned over his shoulder, her face pale. "Elias, look at this. The infected are sharing information. They're reacting faster, coordinating attacks. This isn't just a virus anymore." Elias swallowed hard. "It's a mind. Coordinated attacks. On the war-ravaged colony of Vesper 9, Captain Jonathan Reed led his squad through the ruins of a fallen city. Smoke curled from burning wreckage, and the air smelled of death. "Stay sharp," he ordered, his voice tense. "Athra-mutated creatures have been sighted near the eastern sector." His soldiers moved cautiously, rifles ready. Then, a sound. A low, clicking noise echoed through the streets. Sergeant Dwayne Fisher froze. "Sir, we got movement." Shapes emerged from the shadows. Twisted humanoid figures with glowing green veins. But this time, they didn't rush blindly like before. They flanked. They set up ambush points. "Fall back. Now," Reed shouted. It was too late. Explosions erupted from both sides, cutting off their retreat. The infected had set traps. They had planned this. Gunfire roared as the soldiers fought back, but the enemy was overwhelming. One by one, his squad fell. As Captain Reed reloaded, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. A massive Athra creature watching from the rooftops. Its black eyes weren't empty. They were aware. Hijacking humanity's war machines. On board the UEG dreadnought Valkyrie, Admiral Sarah Monroe reviewed distress signals pouring in from multiple systems. Every colony near the infection zone was under siege. "Admiral, we're picking up an unauthorized signal from our sister ship, the Iron Fist," the comms officer reported. Monroe narrowed her eyes. "Put it through." Static crackled, then a voice that sent shivers down the spines of everyone on the bridge. "You are no longer the dominant species. The Iron Fist, one of humanity's most powerful warships, had been taken. Its crew, infected." Moments later, the Valkyrie's defense systems went offline. The Iron Fist opened fire. "They're controlling the ship," an officer gasped. Monroe gritted her teeth. "They're not just infected anymore. They're thinking." The fall of planets. One by one, human colonies fell. Entire cities were overrun. The Athra swarm grew, consuming everything in its path. At UEG High Command, panic spread, generals argued. Scientists searched for answers. But Elias Carter already knew the truth. "They're not just attacking us," he said grimly. "They're evolving. And if we don't stop them now, we won't survive." The Biohazard Wars had entered a new phase. The enemy was no longer just a virus. It was a hive mind, and it had declared war on humanity. Humanity strikes back. Dr. Elias Carter stared at the holographic display in disbelief. The data before him was impossible, yet it was their only chance. A counter-virus, one that could disrupt the Athra hive mind, was theoretically possible. But there was a problem. The key component required something unthinkable. A living hive queen. The Athra, an insectoid alien species, operated under a collective intelligence. Their hive queens were the core of their entire swarm, controlling billions of drones through a vast telepathic network. Killing one could cripple a hive, but capturing one alive, that was suicide. Yet, Earth was running out of time. The Athra swarm was advancing toward the solar system, consuming everything in its path. If this plan failed, humanity would be wiped out. Operation Excision. Aboard the UHS Retribution, Commander Adrian Voss addressed his strike team. "We have one objective," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Capture a hive queen alive. No mistakes. No hesitation." The target was an Athra-infested research colony on Vega 9. Once a human outpost, it had fallen to the swarm months ago. Now, it was a breeding ground for the Athra, with countless drones protecting the queen. Their mission was clear: go in fast, grab the queen, and get out before the swarm overwhelmed them. As the dropship pierced the thick clouds of Vega 9, Voss checked his rifle. Around him, his team prepared in silence. These were the best soldiers humanity had left, bio-enhanced, battle-hardened, and ready to die if needed. The doors of the dropship hissed open, revealing a nightmare below. The colony was gone, replaced by a writhing landscape of chitin and pulsating organic structures. Alien growths covered the ruined buildings, turning them into towering nests. The air was thick with spores. Voss signaled his team forward. They moved with precision, silenced weapons cutting down wandering drones. Each step deeper into the hive was like walking into the jaws of a beast. Inside the central hive chamber, they saw her. The hive queen loomed over them, her massive form pulsing with life. She was surrounded by thousands of drones, her brood protecting her with mindless devotion. Then she sensed them. A deafening screech rang out. The hive erupted into chaos. "Move E!" Voss roared. Plasma fire lit up the darkness as the team fought their way forward. Drones swarmed them from every direction, mindlessly sacrificing themselves to shield their queen. Private Jensen fell first, torn apart by razor-sharp mandibles. Sergeant Rice followed, detonating a grenade as she was overwhelmed. Voss reached the queen, slamming a containment device onto her thorax. The device pulsed with energy, disrupting her neural link with the swarm. She convulsed, her shriek echoing through the hive as her drones hesitated for the first time. It was their opening. With brute force, they dragged her into the dropship, fighting every step. The swarm, now in a frenzy, threw itself at them in endless waves. The ship's guns roared, vaporizing hundreds of drones. But it wasn't enough. Then the ground itself trembled. The hive was collapsing. The Athra, sensing their queen's capture, had triggered a self-destruct response. They would rather burn the entire planet than let humanity win. The dropship lifted off just as the hive caved in. Fire and biomatter exploded below, consuming everything. The team had lost half their numbers, but they had done the impossible. They had a hive queen. The final move. Back on Earth, Dr. Carter wasted no time. His team worked tirelessly, using the Queen's unique biology to synthesize the countervirus. Time was running out. The swarm had detected the Queen's location, and now they were coming. Every telescope, every long-range scanner confirmed it. The Athra Armada was moving straight for Earth. Billions of drones, hundreds of hive ships, a force greater than anything humanity had ever faced. This was it. The final battle had begun. The final infestation. The sky burned with fire as the Athra swarm descended upon Earth. Massive bioships, covered in writhing flesh and pulsating veins, blocked out the sun. They did not land like traditional invaders. Instead, they spilled, a flood of living horrors, crawling, slithering, and flying in every direction. In the streets of Washington, D.C., General Marcus Steele stood inside the underground war room, watching live feeds of the battle. Cities burned, entire armies vanished, and the swarm adapted at terrifying speed. Lasers, bullets, even nuclear blasts. Nothing seemed to stop them for long. "We've lost New York," a voice announced. "London, gone. Tokyo is falling." President Eleanor Graves clenched her fists. The fate of humanity hung by a thread. A fight against the impossible. High above Earth, the last human fleets fought with everything they had. AI-controlled drones launched plasma barrages, railguns shredded the sky, and orbital bombardments turned the ground into molten craters. But the swarm was limitless. Every time a bioship exploded, it released millions of spores that grew into new creatures within minutes. The swarm fed on energy itself, mutating to resist whatever humanity threw at them. "This isn't war," whispered Dr. Alan Finch, the chief scientist behind the countervirus project. "This is extinction." The president turned toward him. "Is the virus ready?" Dr. Finch hesitated. The countervirus was Earth's last hope, a biological weapon designed to infect and destroy the swarm's genetic structure. But there was a cost. It could wipe out half of Earth's ecosystem in the process. "We have no choice," the president said. Her voice was firm, but there was sorrow in her eyes. "Do it." Deploying the last hope. Deep inside a hidden military lab, technicians activated massive biolaunchers. The counter-virus, stored in sleek silver missiles, was ready for global deployment. It had to be released everywhere at once. Otherwise, the swarm would adapt. With a single command, the missiles launched. Across the world, the sky filled with streaks of light. The swarm, sensing the attack, tried to intercept, but it was too late. The virus spread like wildfire, infiltrating every living piece of the Athra creatures. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, chaos. The swarm screamed, their bodies writhing and collapsing into dust. Ships melted into organic sludge, creatures tore themselves apart, and the skies darkened with the remains of their destruction. A world in ruins. But Earth paid the price. Forests withered. Rivers turned black. Millions of animals perished. The planet gasped as the virus did its work. In the aftermath, silence fell. No more creatures. No more war. Just the smoking ruins of civilization. General Steele looked at the devastated world. "We won," he muttered. President Graves closed her eyes. "At what cost?" Dr. Finch adjusted his glasses. "Earth will recover. It will take centuries, but we have a future." And that was enough. Humanity had survived. For now, extinction or survival. The counter-virus spread like wildfire, carried by the wind, water, and even the bodies of the dying swarm. The skies over Earth turned a deep, unnatural red as the altered atmosphere triggered a global chain reaction. The hive's massive organic structures pulsed violently, their bioluminescent veins flickering erratically. The swarm felt it instantly. Their limbs convulsed, their exoskeletons cracking as their very DNA was rewritten. The mighty warriors that once tore through human cities collapsed, their screams merging into a horrifying symphony of agony. The once perfect synchronization of the hive shattered. Individual drones staggered aimlessly, their connection to the hive queen severed. In the heart of the largest hive nest, the queen let out a shriek that echoed across the planet. Her body trembled as the virus invaded her genetic code, twisting and corrupting it. She tried to resist, pouring all her energy into stabilizing the swarm, but it was useless. The Athra strain, the biological foundation of the swarm, was collapsing. Victory at a cost. Across the world, humanity watched in awe and terror. The swarm was dying. Armies that had been on the brink of destruction now stood victorious. The once invincible invaders lay in piles of writhing, twitching bodies, their reign of terror finally ending. But victory came at a price. The counter-virus had been designed to destroy the swarm's biology, but Earth's ecosystems had been deeply entangled with it. Crops wilted. Pollinators vanished. The oceans turned acidic. The very air carried microscopic remnants of the counter-virus, affecting not just the swarm, but everything it had touched, including Earth's fragile food chain. Within days, entire farmlands failed. Livestock suffered genetic mutations. Freshwater sources became unstable. What was once a battle for survival against an alien enemy had turned into a struggle against the planet itself. Humanity had won the war, but could it survive the aftermath? A world in ruins. In the remains of what had once been major cities, scientists and engineers scrambled to find solutions. Air filtration systems were deployed, but they were barely keeping up with the atmospheric changes. Hydroponic farming was expanded, but food supplies were dangerously low. People turned to rationing. Nations that had fought side by side against the swarm now fought over dwindling resources. The war had ended, but chaos was only beginning. And then, amidst the turmoil, something unexpected happened. A message from the stars. Deep in a secret military bunker, a radio operator noticed something strange. A signal, faint but unmistakably artificial, had been intercepted from deep space. The technician's hands trembled as he enhanced the signal, filtering out the cosmic background noise. A voice, cold and emotionless, emerged from the static. "We were only the first. Others are coming." Silence filled the room. The message repeated. Again and again. The technicians' blood ran cold. The swarm had been a nightmare, a force so powerful that humanity had barely survived. But they weren't the true threat. They were only the beginning. What comes next? News of the transmission spread quickly among the surviving world leaders. Some refused to believe it. Others fell into despair, but a few knew what had to be done. There was no time to rebuild as before. The old world was gone. If humanity wanted to survive what was coming, it had to evolve. Scientists pushed forward with new research, combining what they had learned from the swarm with their own technology. Soldiers trained for battles beyond Earth, preparing for wars not just on the ground but in the stars. The human race had spent centuries looking up at the night sky with wonder. Now it stared into the darkness with fear, because out there, beyond the stars, something else was watching. And it was coming.